Hello, I'm Michael Wilson, and we're going to be doing a quick tutorial of CoronaTiled, creating a map and loading it into the latest version of the CoronaSDK. This should give you an overview of basically how to build a map in Tiled, as well as how to set the properties so they come over in CoronaTiled. So let's get started. What you're looking at here is the current build. I think it's 0.90 on my MacBook Pro. We're going to go ahead and create a new map. I know the tile set that we're going to be using is set at 32 by 32. The map width and map height here are set up to basically make a 32,000 or 3200 by 3200 pixel map. We're going to take that down for the purposes of this demo. We do want it to be larger than the screen so we can show a little scrolling, but we don't need it to be all that big. So let's make it fairly long at 64, but maybe only 32 pixels tall. So this will give us a 2048 by 1024 map with this tile size. We hit OK, and now we have our map. You can Option key or Command key mouse wheel or Control on the PC to get an idea of what the entire map looks like. So once we have our map, we need to load a tile set. We do that by going to Map and New Tile Set. All the files that we're using here will be available from a link in the video notes. So let's go ahead and load that. So this is the tile set we'll be using. We're not going to use a transparent color because it's a PNG with transparency built in. Tile width and height 32 by 32. We don't need to do anything with the margin and spacing. That's if you have any margin between the tiles. Actually, CoronaTiled does support this. So if you do have a tile set that has a couple pixels between each of the tiles, you can set that. You'll bring it in. Drawing offsets mainly for isometric maps, which we don't support right now. So we do that. We bring in the, I'm actually close the minimap here to give us a little bit more space, and close the terrains as well. So now we're just focusing simply on our layers and our tiles. So this is the tile set that we have right now. You can scroll around here and look. You see we've got this really nice kind of Mario Brothers-esque tile set that we can use to pop in on the screen. The way we work with Tiled is you can grab a series of tiles and it'll put a bunch of tiles out at the same time, stamp them out, or you can grab one tile at a time to draw one tile at a time. You can also right-click to surround a group of tiles on the map area and use that to kind of as a quick cut, copy, paste routine to really kind of build your map quickly. So you can see here we can make a pretty detailed portion of the map in a relatively little amount of time. Close that off here if we wanted to, and so on and so on. I think, yeah, so they have Photoshop style scrolling, so if you hold the space bar and grab the mouse wheel, or hold the space bar and move the mouse around, you can scroll your map as well. So you get a little bit of the idea of how to grab a few tiles and paint with them on screen. The next thing you'll notice is also very similar to Photoshop is we have the ability for layers. So we're going to add a new tile layer here. We're going to call it background. I'm going to move that to the back. I'm actually going to erase everything on this layer here. So we do not need that right this second. So go in the background, I'm going to grab the sky here, and I'm going to fill with a fill bucket the entire sky. So you can see this gives us our background. In practicality, we probably wouldn't do that for a game. It'd be much easier for us to lay down a solid color in the background, or we do have support for image layers where you can actually load a very large image to act as the background. Corona is much better at displaying one great big image versus all these little tiles from a performance standpoint. So, but for now, this gets the point across that we can kind of fill that. So to give us an idea of where the ground is, we're going to fill the bottom area here with our water look. Okay, so we see we have our top and bottom. Actually, I don't think I want that much water, so let's just grab some more sky here and give us just a few bits of things. So this becomes our background. We're going to create a new layer, add a tiled layer. We're going to call this water, and move it again under our main layer here. We'll take a couple of things here. We'll take our little water guys. Again, let's zoom in so we can see what we're doing here. So we can see the sky poking out from behind these things because we have it sitting on a layer above the sky. We can also grab our little fancy water bubbles here, and this might be where we want to put those guys. So we'll just kind of draw them around. It's actually a really, if you have to do a lot of this, there's a really interesting paint bucket mode for tiled where it'll just randomly put any tiles you have selected. So if I were to select both of these, it would kind of randomly put those in the background. So now we can, kind of turn our layers off and on. We see our water layer here. It's actually a really good reason that we want to keep this in a separate layer, because if we do put collision on the water, we're only looking for collision with the tiles in this layer versus if we would add everything into the water. We have our background, so let's add a little bit of ground. So we'll call this our ground layer. Grab all the edges here, and we'll put a couple little floaty platforms out. So now, since we want these platforms kind of look a little bit more solid, we'll give those a little bit on both sides here. Alrighty, so this is about the most basic way you can use tiled. Basically just making a little bit of a what I call decoration map, right? So there's really no information in these tiles. It's just visual of where the tiles belong in the grand scheme of things. So we could actually even bring this down to say here, and then move our water layer on top of that to give us a nice little feel of these pieces of land here actually going all the way to the bottom. Alrighty, so now we have our little map. We're going to go ahead and save this map, and then we're going to export this map as a JSON file. Now in CoronaTiled you can supports both JSON and Lua files. So you could say this is a Lua file as well, but JSON actually takes a little bit less space. And so as you can see here, we have a very, very, very basic main Lua file. This is really all you need. We're going to set the status bar to hidden. In these two lines, we're actually going to set the filtering from kind of an anti-aliased filter to the nearest neighbor, and that's just simply because of the graphic style we're using. We're using more of a pixelated graphic style. And so it should expand looking pixely, not kind of near bilinear filtered. But that's personal preference. You can change that. Or if you have a graphic style that lends itself a little bit more to smooth scaling, you can set that up as well. We're going to require the physics engine. We're going to require the tiled map library. We're going to set our physics draw mode to hybrid so we can see any of the physics that we put in. And then really you're looking at one line to load the map. Map equals tiled map. You can use a colon or a period here. Load, then demo JSON, the file that we just saved. Everything else here is just adding a function, a touch listener to the map so we can kind of scroll it around. let's go ahead and launch this. You're going to get a little feedback here with basically information about your map. Your map has this many layers. Here's the orientation, the height in tiles, the individual tile height, some version information, content zoom. This content zoom is actually an interesting thing, because if your map isn't a power of 2 of whatever screen display you have, the tiles themselves will shrink a little bit, and so we need to draw them a little closer together to make sure they line up to the pixels. And that loads your map in. So as you can see, we can grab a hold of our map here and kind of scroll it around. Just by default, because I put the reference point to the center, this whole thing is centered on the display, but we can make our reference point wherever we want. So you see, just that easy, now you have a map in. But that's just one piece of it. We also want to load in some physics, and so let's skedaddle back to Tiled to put in some physics inside our map. So I'm going to again use this stamp tool on the ground to grab these 2 towers. And I'm going to pop them in over here, maybe do another one here. So now we have a little bit more space, and we're saving as the TMX file, and the second we export this as a JSON file, if we were to snap back to Corona, it's already reloaded and got us our map. So right about here is where when we reload, we're going to have some action. So we're going to put some physics objects here. So the next kind of layer we're going to create is an object layer. Now, object layers are interesting because they're actually vector graphics that you can drop in and then query through one of our find objects function, and you could use these as items that your character might jump into, teleporters, doorways, keys, bad guys, non-player characters. All these things would be objects. You would then search the map for where the objects are located, grab the image handle, and then change it to whatever sprite you want within inside your game. It might not make a lot of sense right now, but we can do a very simple object just by putting a little square here. And we go to our kind of our grab tool here, and we can move it around. And now we have this rectangle that lives in there, so I'm going to go ahead and export this out as the demo JSON file again. And when we go back to Corona, we see we have a nice white block here. So this white block is a display rectangle with inside Corona. So I can get to its properties of width, height. I can set its alpha. In fact, that's one of the more cool parts of CoronaTiled. If I go into my object properties here, so we can use this to signify a start point for a level, use it to signify an end point for a level. This basically becomes a visual indicator of something that we want to use in our game. Sometimes visual indicators are great, sometimes they're not. You'd want something more, so let's delete that out, and we're going to add an image object. And image objects you can think of as objects here that we want, that are sprites that we don't necessarily want to line up to the grid. So we're going to take a crate, we're on the object layer, adding an image layer, and we're putting a crate right there. And so as you can see, our crate does not have to line up with the grid space. It's just a free-floating sprite outside of here. The nice thing about these is any of the object properties that you set here are actually Corona properties. So if I say alpha, and make the alpha 0.5. Hit OK. Replace that. Our Corona project relaunches in the background, and you see we now have a 50% transparent crate. If I go here, move it, object properties, I'll set its rotation. I'll spell it right though. Set its rotation for 45 degrees. We can see now the object is 50% alpha and at 45 degrees. Anything you can think of, X scale, Y scale, anything that affects the display object, you can put in. So we're going to go back to object properties, remove that alpha. Let's set a rotation for something less crazy, maybe 15 degrees. So now that we have our crate object here that we can move around, let's set some of its physics properties. We'll do this by going to the object layer and letting the object layer know that every object on this layer has physics properties. And we'll do that by going in, typing physics, enabled, and I'm going to spell that right, enabled is true. When I do this, so now you can see as we pull this up, the hybrid drawing mode says that this object actually has physics on it, so you can see because it's highlighted a little bit. We default to any physics object being a static object, so it just kind of sits there. If we want this object to move, we'll set the object properties. We'll go in and say body type, which this is just a Corona convention for their Box 2D physics engine. Dynamic. And OK. Now we should see our box is missing. Well, it's not really missing. It's there. It's just falling down. So, well, that's great. How are we going to keep that box from falling down? Well, let's go back in, and we'll make a new layer of ground. That's going to be our physics collision layer. So we're going to add a new tile layer called Collide. We will move it down right above the ground. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put everything that's collidable for that crate in. So I'm going to go and grab this little piece of ground here from the ground layer. And I'm going to paste it into the collide layer. In fact, I'll paste this one here, this one here, this one here. Let me extend that one off a little bit. So these are all brand new collision layers. Another one here, another one here. So now if I hide my ground, I see just this. These are the things that we want the crate to collide with. So I'm going to go into my collision layer, set my layer properties. We're going to turn physics on. Okay, and now the crate should collide with what we're seeing there. Replace, and now we go back to our Corona simulation. You see the pieces of ground are highlighted as being collision layers, and our crate is falling and stopping. So let's go back to our crate layer. If I were to grab this one crate and duplicate the object, which not just duplicates the object, but also duplicates the properties, sets rotation to 0. I can now take a bunch of crates, which again are going to collide with themselves. They're going to collide with the ground objects that we made. So let's reset them. And we look around here, and we should find a lot of our crates. Now, of course, we didn't set up any particular friction or density or anything like that. So these aren't great. It doesn't look great as far as the falling properties yet, but you do get the idea of these crates kind of dumping off.
So I just don't.
So there we go. Now we have a bunch of crates kind of falling down, colliding with our ground, sliding around, so on and so on. So if you were to put a Mario Brothers kind of character in here, he'd be able to jump and land on those. You could have some sort of piece of physics sitting behind that as well. And that covers pretty much how we do basic physics. Now we can get in the situation where we want a physics object to have a little bit different shape. So maybe our mushroom here, I want to put this in the collision layer as well, maybe right here. If I do this, it's going to have a collision shape that's pretty much the entire shape of the square it's in, the tile it's in. If I want to change that, I can go to the individual tile properties and set its shape from here, just by picking shape and putting in up to 8 coordinate points. So I could do, assuming 0, 0 is the center, I could do -16, comma, -16. That would be the lower left-hand corner. Let's do the center top, which would be -16, comma 16, or actually, -16, comma, actually 0, comma -16, which would be the top, top center, and then the lower right, which would be 16, comma 16, and this is going to give us a triangle surrounding that. Our mushroom here, that of course stays over if I move it anywhere. That shape property stays there. I'm going to save this, export one more time, and we should be able to see in our Corona project that, I don't necessarily type in the points correctly, but you get the idea. We were updating the collision shape of just that one tile. Still not perfect, but definitely closer.
It's all about the source ordering it. So without a doubt,
so now we've seen custom tile shapes, seen physics property objects, and actually building a map. One of the last things I want to do, which is a little bit more code intensive, is I want to name one of these objects and find its position using code. So let's go back to our crates, and I'm going to select one of these crates. I'm going to go to the object properties. I'm going to set its name to my crate. So you see the X and Y coordinates. We also have width and height. We can set those if we want to. Those properties will get passed along. I can also set a custom property. I can say filled is equal to 56, just a random property. So just on my crate, because we selected just one, not the object layer, we know its rotation is set for 15, but it's also has this random property called filled set to 56 for no particular reason. I also am going to get rid of its body type. I'm going to save and export as again. I'll get rid of tiled here. And hopefully we have our one static object up here. So one of the functions that we have is a function called findObject. Let's see if I can zoom in here so we can see a little bit better. So if I want to get the image handle of one of these objects, I can actually, just like I was doing a display new image, I can go my crate equals tiled find objects. I pass it the name of the object I want to find. It's all case sensitive. and then I pass it the data for the map. And right now the data gets passed back as a data field, so we use this map data. In the future, I think I'm going to split these two things out as I start pulling in something with Caleb Pease, who's actually a huge contributor to this project. Start pulling in some of his code. I think we're going to separate loading the map data from actually loading the map. That way we can do some interesting culling and camera movements and things like that.
Yep.
So what this did was not necessarily create a new object, but give me the ability to work with this object. Image dot rotation equals 0, so that should set its rotation back to 0, and then mycrate dot do print mycrate dot image dot film, because those actually get attached to the image object, not the and now we have our little guy here. Instead of being tilted like he should have been, now he's straight. And if we go to our debug window here, you can see 56, that custom property that I had set, gets printed when I do this mycrate image fill. So you can use this not only to find these images here, but you could use it to find anything else that you can put in tiled into an object layer. So this includes, if we go here to our crates, I can make these squares. We can do circles if you need a radius. We can do polylines, and we can also do regular lines. Actually, these regular lines would be better in a collision layer if you wanted to quickly surround something that you wanted to have collide. Those could all go there. We also do our best to show what those look like. So if you do use a lot of vector objects, you may want to hide that layer. You can adjust actually the opacity of any of the layers within tiled, and that information comes right over into our Corona module. So you can see here we have some representations of those objects that we drew on screen, and they actually come pretty close to living where they're supposed to. And that pretty much wraps it up. I know we covered a lot of stuff really quickly. Hopefully this will give you a good insight on how to build levels in Tiled and how to set those physics properties in CoronaTiled. Thanks very much, and let me know if you have any feedback on the video.